It was a cold morning when the man first heard the faint cries in the distance. He had been out on a routine walk through the snow-covered plains, never expecting his day to take such a dramatic turn. The cries were unlike any he'd ever heard before, agonizing, desperate, a voice pleading for help. His heart skipped a beat as he followed the sound, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. There, lying in the snow, was a Mustang, a majestic animal, its coat a deep brown, shivering from the cold, with a visible injury to its leg. The man froze. He had seen horses before, but this one was different. There was something in its eyes, a raw, pained intelligence, that made him hesitate. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining things. Horses didn't beg for help, did they? But this Mustang was no ordinary creature. It seemed to be looking directly at him, as though it knew exactly what it needed and who could provide it. The man approached cautiously, unsure of how to react. He could see the blood from the injured leg, and the way the Mustang shifted its weight to avoid putting pressure on it. The animal was in pain, but there was more. It was as if it was reaching out to him, asking him, in some inexplicable way, to help. His initial instinct was to call for help, but there was no one for miles. The town was far away, and the path he had taken was remote. The snow was falling heavier now, and the wind began to bite harder. The Mustang was in trouble, and it seemed like only he could do something. With a deep breath, the man knelt down beside the animal, his hands trembling as he assessed the injury. He'd never dealt with anything like this before. But before he could even think of how to help, the Mustang looked at him again, its eyes wide and filled with something that made his stomach churn. It wasn't just pain, it was desperation. The animal seemed to be pleading with him, communicating something more than just fear. It was as though the Mustang knew that its survival depended entirely on the man's next move. The man felt a lump rise in his throat. He had been through hardships in his own life, but nothing quite like this. His heart ached for the creature before him, and as he slowly reached out, his fingers brushing the Mustang's cold fur, he couldn't shake the feeling that something far beyond the ordinary was unfolding. There was more to this encounter, more to this Mustang, than he could ever imagine. What happened next would leave him speechless, and change his life forever. The man's hands were shaking as he gently touched the Mustang's leg. He had seen injured animals before, he'd grown up on a farm, and tending to the livestock was part of life. But this felt different. As he moved carefully to examine the injury, the Mustang's breathing grew shallow, and its head lifted slightly, eyes locked onto his face. There was a moment of silence between them. The man couldn't help but feel that this wasn't just an animal in pain, this was something deeper. Something more. The air felt heavier as he processed the Mustang's gaze. It wasn't the fearful, wild look of an animal scared for its life. This was something more intelligent, more aware. He quickly examined the wound, a deep gash to its right front leg. It looked painful, but manageable. He knew enough to know it wasn't life-threatening if he acted quickly. But the Mustang wasn't making it easy. The animal flinched every time he touched the wound, whinnying in pain. It was clear it wasn't going to let him work freely. He needed to calm it down. He stood up, unsure of what to do next. His breath formed a mist in the cold air, and he ran a hand over his face, trying to think. There was a small cabin not far from where he stood, and though it was far too late to drive to town for help, it might have supplies he could use to bandage the wound. But even as the thought crossed his mind, the Mustang's cries echoed again, this time softer, almost like a plea. His gut twisted with a sudden sense of urgency. He couldn't just leave it. The Mustang was clearly intelligent, perhaps even more so than he had realized. The man knelt down again, trying to comfort the animal, speaking softly to it, telling it everything would be all right. Something about the moment felt surreal. It was like the Mustang could understand him. He felt a strange bond forming between them, an unspoken connection. The Mustang's breathing had slowed, and the tension in its muscles seemed to ease. Still, there was a deeper mystery to the animal, one that gnawed at the man's mind. It wasn't just an injured horse in the snow. It felt like fate had led him here, like this Mustang had been waiting for him. Without thinking, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small packet of granola bars he'd been carrying for the walk. It wasn't much, but it was food, and he needed to calm the horse somehow. He offered it, hoping that it would at least ease the Mustang's pain for a moment. To his surprise, the Mustang's nose twitched and it sniffed at the bar, before nuzzling his hand in a way that felt almost human. A sudden chill ran down the man's spine. It was odd, unnerving, even, that an animal, much less a wild Mustang, would react so gently to a human. The connection between them was becoming more intense with each passing moment. The man tried to shake off the strange feeling, but it was there, deep in his gut. Something was very wrong. He turned to the side, thinking of what he could do next. He considered the path leading to the cabin. It was the best chance he had to help the animal. But when he turned back, the Mustang was looking at him again, not with fear, not with pain, but with something far more disconcerting, expectation. The Mustang's eyes were fixed on his face, unwavering. There was a clarity to them, something that made the man feel as if the creature wasn't just waiting for help, it was waiting for him to make a decision. And then, as though sensing his uncertainty, the Mustang took a cautious step forward, its hooves crunching through the snow, and without warning, it lowered its head toward the man's hand. This simple, but oddly deliberate gesture, made the man's heart skip a beat. It wasn't just an animal seeking comfort, it was an animal showing him something. The weight of the moment crashed over him. The Mustang wasn't just in pain. It was asking for something. A plea, not for help, but for understanding. The man hesitated for only a moment. He knew he couldn't leave now. There was more to this than a mere injury, more to this Mustang than he could possibly comprehend. The pull to help it, to understand it, was overwhelming. With a deep breath, the man made a choice. He would stay. He would care for this Mustang in whatever way he could. But as he crouched down to inspect the leg again, his hand brushed against something strange. A mark. A faint, almost imperceptible symbol on the Mustang's coat. The mystery deepened, and the man was no longer sure what was happening, or what he had stumbled upon. The man stared at the symbol on the Mustang's coat. It wasn't just a mark, it seemed almost deliberate, like it had been placed there for a reason. He touched it, tracing the lines with his fingers. The fur around it felt slightly different, almost unnatural. His mind raced. What kind of animal had this kind of marking? The Mustang stood still, eyes fixed on him as if waiting for him to make sense of the mystery. The man's thoughts swirled with confusion and awe. It was just a wild horse, right? No, this felt wrong. There was something more at play here, something beyond the usual explanations. As he examined the mark more closely, the Mustang suddenly tensed. Its ears flicked nervously, and its eyes widened with fear. The man froze, his heart racing. Had he touched something he shouldn't have? The Mustang started to back away, dragging its injured leg, but there was a strange calm in its movements. It was as if the animal had just made a decision of its own. It wasn't in pain anymore. The injury, which had seemed so severe just moments ago, appeared to be lessening before the man's eyes. The blood on the snow around the Mustang's leg was fading as if time itself was reversing. This was impossible. The man blinked, rubbed his eyes, and then looked again. The wound was healing, right in front of him. There was no doubt in his mind that he was seeing something beyond natural. The Mustang's leg, once bent awkwardly, now straightened. The gash on its leg began to close, skin knitting together as though the injury had never existed at all. A chill ran through the man's spine. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. It felt like some kind of miracle, yet it defied all logic. This wasn't just an ordinary horse. There was something extraordinary about it, something far beyond what he could have imagined. The Mustang's eyes, now full of a strange wisdom, met his once again. It wasn't just a silent plea anymore, it was a clear invitation, a beckoning. The man stood frozen, torn between his disbelief and the undeniable pull to follow whatever was happening. Before he could react, the Mustang made a small, purposeful movement. It turned and began walking slowly, its hooves crunching in the snow. The man, unable to resist, instinctively followed. What could he do? He had already witnessed the impossible, now he needed to understand. They moved toward the edge of the woods, deeper into the forest than the man had ever ventured before. The path was narrow and winding, snow piling up in soft mounds around the trees. The air felt different here, crisp and still, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Every few steps, the Mustang would glance back at him, checking to see if he was still following. Its movements were graceful, almost hypnotic, and the man's mind raced with questions. Where was this animal taking him? Why had it healed itself so quickly? And what was the meaning behind the symbol on its coat? As they ventured further, the feeling of being watched crept into the man's senses. He could feel eyes on him, though he saw no one. The forest, with its quiet, snow-covered trees, seemed to hold secrets just beneath the surface. Every now and then, the Mustang would pause, and the man could hear a distant sound, a rustling, like whispers, though there was no one else around. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient oak tree, its trunk twisted and knotted with age. The Mustang halted and stood still for a moment, then slowly walked to the base of the tree. It stopped, lowered its head, and pawed the ground. The man's breath caught in his throat as he approached. The air around the tree felt heavier, charged with an energy that he couldn't explain. He knelt down beside the Mustang, whose eyes never left the tree. Something was happening here, something beyond comprehension. And then, without warning, the ground beneath them began to shift. The man felt a tremor, almost imperceptible at first, but growing stronger with each passing second. He staggered to his feet, eyes wide with shock. What was going on? The Mustang let out a soft whinny, its head raised high. It was as though the animal was calling out to something in the distance. The man's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the area, wondering if something, someone, was approaching. But the forest remained still. Only the Mustang seemed to be responding to an invisible presence. The ground continued to quake, and suddenly, there was a flash of light. The air shimmered, and the sound of something ancient and powerful reverberated through the trees. The man shielded his eyes, unable to comprehend what was happening. When the light faded, everything was still again. The Mustang stood before the tree, its coat now glistening like it had been bathed in moonlight. But what stood before the man was not the wild creature he had first encountered. This was something entirely different, something far older, far wiser. A sense of awe and fear mingled in the man's chest. He had just witnessed something impossible, and yet, the evidence was all around him. He knew one thing for sure, his life, and his understanding of the world, would never be the same. The Mustang stood still, as though it had become one with the forest itself. The shimmer of light had faded, leaving only the eerie silence of the clearing. The man could hardly breathe, his heart still pounding in his chest. What had just happened? Had he imagined it? He shook his head, trying to make sense of the strange, surreal moment. The Mustang was now different. Its fur glistened under the weak sunlight breaking through the trees, and its eyes, those eyes, held a deep knowing that sent chills through the man's body. It wasn't just a wild horse anymore. This creature was ancient, otherworldly. It was as if time had passed over it differently, leaving behind something that shouldn't exist in this world. The man slowly stepped forward, his feet crunching the snow beneath him. He reached out tentatively, but the Mustang didn't flinch. It stood firm, unafraid. He ran his hand over its sleek coat, marveling at how soft and warm it felt against the coldness of the surrounding forest. There was no longer any sign of the injury that had crippled it just hours ago. The Mustang turned its head slightly, as if urging him to follow. Without a word, the man took a step closer, his eyes never leaving the creature. As if guided by some unseen force, the Mustang began walking slowly again, this time with purpose. The man didn't hesitate. He followed. They passed through the clearing, moving deeper into the forest, where the trees grew denser and the snow piled higher. The air was still, but there was an odd energy here, like something ancient, something older than the world itself, was watching them. After a few moments, they arrived at a hidden spot in the woods, a place the man could have sworn he had never seen before, though it felt oddly familiar. In front of him stood a stone archway, weathered and moss-covered, almost as if it had been there for centuries. The archway led to a small stone circle, surrounded by tall trees, their branches reaching toward the sky as though they were trying to protect something within. The Mustang approached the archway, its hooves tapping against the stone, and then stopped. It turned toward the man, and this time, there was no mistaking the look in its eyes. It wasn't just an animal anymore. It was a guardian. A sentinel. The creature was not simply leading him, it was guiding him to something. The man stood at the edge of the stone circle, his pulse quickening as he took in his surroundings. The air around the circle seemed to hum with energy, as though it was alive. And then, without warning, the Mustang let out a low, almost melodic whinny. The sound echoed through the trees, reverberating with a deep, ancient resonance. At that moment, the man felt the ground beneath his feet shift again. The stone seemed to pulse with a faint light, and a soft, otherworldly glow began to fill the space between them. The trees around the circle started to creak and groan as though they were awakening from a long slumber. The man took a cautious step forward, his mind reeling. His body was frozen, caught between fear and awe. The Mustang had led him here for a reason. But what was the reason? What was this place? Before he could gather his thoughts, a strange voice echoed in his mind, clear and direct, though the words came from no one he could see. "You are the chosen one." The words sent a shock through the man's entire body. He stumbled back, his heart racing. Had he heard that? Was he imagining it? The voice wasn't coming from the Mustang, it wasn't coming from anywhere. It was as if the words were being spoken directly into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. Chosen for what? He thought, but no answer came. The silence that followed was deafening, and the only sound was the rhythmic tapping of the Mustang's hooves on the stone. The Mustang took a few steps back and lowered its head, as though bowing to something unseen. The man was on edge, his mind spinning with questions that he couldn't answer. Why had the Mustang brought him here? Why was he the one chosen? Suddenly, a brilliant light enveloped the stone circle, blinding him for a moment. When the light faded, he blinked, his vision adjusting. Standing before him was no longer just a Mustang, but a creature of light, its form shifting and glowing in ways that defied reason. The horse had transformed into something far more magnificent, its body shimmering with ethereal energy. It wasn't just an animal anymore, it was something ancient, something that existed between worlds. The man stood motionless, his mouth dry. He felt the ground beneath him stabilize, and the air around him cleared, leaving a sense of peace. The creature, this magnificent being, was no longer just an injured horse. It was something sent to guide him, to lead him to this moment. He understood now. The Mustang had healed itself, led him through the forest, and brought him here because he was meant to witness this transformation. He wasn't just witnessing an ancient creature's power. He was witnessing something that would change the course of his life forever. With a final, knowing glance, the glowing Mustang turned and began to walk away, vanishing into the woods as if it had never existed at all. And with it, the man was left alone with the weight of what he had just seen. His life, already shaped by the struggles of the world, would never be the same. He had been part of something far greater than he could understand, a glimpse into a world that was far older, far wiser, and far more mysterious than the world he knew. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The man stood there, still in the stone circle, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. The air was cold again, and the snow continued to fall gently, as if nothing had changed. Yet everything had changed. The Mustang, or whatever it had become, had vanished into the woods, leaving him with nothing but the profound weight of the experience. His hands trembled as he placed them on the stones, feeling their ancient coldness beneath his fingers. He didn't know how long he stood there, trying to process what he had seen, trying to understand why he had been chosen. His heart was full, yet empty at the same time. The forest felt quiet now, almost peaceful, but also distant. The energy that had filled the clearing was gone. The only sound was the crunching of snow beneath his feet as he began to walk away from the circle. As he left the woods and made his way back to his cabin, the questions continued to swirl in his mind. What was the Mustang? Why had it appeared to him? He was just an ordinary man, a farmer, someone who had lived a simple life, yet somehow, he had been chosen to witness something so extraordinary. His thoughts turned inward, to the life lessons he had learned over the years. He had faced many struggles in his time, just like everyone else, loss, hardship, pain. But never had he encountered something that made him question the very fabric of reality itself. The encounter with the Mustang had opened his eyes to something greater. Something beyond human understanding. As he entered his cabin and warmed himself by the fire, the man's mind finally settled. He realized that the lesson he had learned in the forest wasn't just about the Mustang, it was about life itself. It was about the importance of seeing beyond the surface, of believing in the impossible, and of understanding that there are forces at work in the world that we cannot control or explain. The Mustang had not just healed itself, it had healed him, too. In that moment of connection, when the creature had looked into his eyes with its deep, knowing gaze, something inside the man had shifted. He had come to understand that sometimes, we are called to places and moments where we are meant to witness something greater than ourselves. And in those moments, we must have the courage to believe, even when the world tells us it's impossible. That night, as the wind howled outside and the snow continued to fall, the man lay in bed, his thoughts calm and clear for the first time in years. He wasn't sure what the Mustang had truly been, or why he had been the one to witness it. But he knew that it had changed him. It had reminded him that there is always more to the world than meets the eye, and that sometimes, we must let go of our need for answers and simply trust in the journey. Life, like the Mustang, was full of mysteries and wonders that could not always be explained. But if we are open to them, if we choose to believe in the impossible, we can experience things that will forever change our understanding of what is real. And so, the man slept peacefully that night, knowing that he had been part of something truly extraordinary. The Mustang had not just been a creature in the snow, it had been a guide, a symbol of the unexpected, and a reminder that miracles could happen, even in the most unlikely of places. The lesson was simple, yet profound. Sometimes, we don't need to understand everything. We just need to be open to the mysteries of life and trust that, in time, everything will reveal itself, just as the Mustang had revealed its truth to him.